Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AVX Live. I am your host, Ryan Finch, Creative Technology Director here at Corporate AV. And as you might guess, this is an unusual week. That's right. I am flying solo for the first time. So the training wheels are off. Joe is somewhere, I'm guessing, on a beach with a nice cocktail in his hand. He's taking pictures with statues. Suffice to say, he has the better end of the deal here. But very excited for what we got for you here today. Of course, today is also special because it is my 30th birthday. So you could ask yourself, wow, Joe is on vacation. He left you alone to do the show on your birthday. What kind of person would do something like that? And I say, a real messed up guy, to be honest with you. But in any case, we'll forgive him. Hopefully he's tuning in today, but I wouldn't hate him if he wasn't. But we are going to be talking about something I would say relevant because of the Delta variant that's been causing a lot of problems lately. The numbers have been heading back up, and people, of course, have been pivoting back to virtual and more virtual sides of hybrid events. So to help with some of the planning processes, we want to get into some of the pre-recording aspects. But of course, before we get into that, I have to remind everyone, please like, comment, share, subscribe, all the above. Every Wednesday, 1 o'clock, we're going to be right here on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So if you can drop us a comment, we'll answer whatever questions you may have live on the show, kind of like this. There we go. Thank you, Marissa. Appreciate it. But yeah, drop us a comment, share some love, as we usually say. Smash the subscribe button, Joe's favorite word. And that certainly helps us keep this thing going. But before we get into the content itself, I want to introduce somebody who is very special to the Corporate AV family, Dane Colon. Dane has been working with us for, I would say, the last few years. Don't quote me on it. I think maybe three to four. But he has been I'd say triple threat, but I think he's got more than three things that he brings to the table. He's been an excellent audio engineer. He knows cameras, photography, live streaming, and of course, he's also an excellent videographer. Dane's kind of like a Swiss Army knife for production in general. And the best part is he's actually a really nice guy too. Usually you don't really get the technical skill and the people skills. That's kind of a rare combination, but Dane's certainly that. So because he's part of our team, I'm not going to belabor the introduction anymore. I'm just going to bring him on and welcome to the show. So Dane, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having me, and happy birthday, man. I didn't know.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. That's okay. I've been flying under the radar, and you also wouldn't think me hosting a show right now. It's not really birthday activity, Maybe I would have liked to take the day off. Who knows?
But you're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you. Well, Dane, why don't we, before we get started on the video production side, tell our lovely audience a bit more about yourself, your background, how you got into this, anything else that I very likely missed.
Okay, how much time do we have?
Not a lot.
Okay, well, let me see how quickly I can condense it. To start, I guess my God-given talent was drawing. Like, that's where I started with all this
really?
stuff. I used to draw a lot as a kid, and I loved drawing comics and all this stuff. And I wanted that to eventually be my career. So when I went to college, initially, I went into school for graphic arts and design. And this was like 1995. So technology wasn't anywhere near what it is now. And I became very frustrated quickly with dealing with pixels, and, Photoshop's capabilities were very limited then. And I didn't have the patience for it. It didn't translate. So after a while with that, I took a break from school. I just kept working, and then I thought about it, and I was like, what do I really want to do, and what else am I interested in? So I wound up going back to school for audio engineering, and I became an audio engineer for a recording studio because I love music. I love the technical side of it. And when I was 15, I got into DJing, so it felt like a natural extension of that. And that lasted for a while. I worked for music stores. I worked for studios. I got a lot of experience there. And I want to say like 2010, I was working for one studio. And then, just change of the industry with computers becoming better. There were less and less big studios out there. And this was a commercial facility that just had a downturn due to the economy. So I wound up getting laid off, and I had a really difficult time, finding another gig in my sector. So after, some time struggling there, I wound up retooling, and I didn't want to start all over. So I took the same tools I had, but I went into corporate, but more in corporate integration. So I started learning how to install systems, service systems, and I wound up eventually getting a job with a company that did service integration, installation, all those things, which I enjoyed, but I wasn't passionate about it. It just became very mechanical, and I always liked the creative side of things. So eventually I wound up finding another studio gig serendipitously, working more in multimedia. And I started off with audio, and as one of the counterparts there, another downturn, was laid off, I was asked to take on more responsibility, starting with photography and then eventually videography. And I wound up embracing both of those things. So it kind of rounded out, I think, the creative trio for me of, audio first, then photography, and then video. And then, I started with drawing. So I feel like it all kind of, works together for me.
Well, creative trio. I mean, I called you a triple threat. So yeah. There you go. That worked Absolutely. Out. I didn't realize. See, it's funny because we actually share some things. We're gonna have to talk, I guess, a little later on about sure. how we got into what we do now. Drawing was like my favorite thing when I was younger. So it's just kind of funny. But certainly, when we look at your work, obviously the creative touch is certainly there. So that makes sense to me now, knowing that. There you go. I learned something too. Excuse me. So moving forward into the call it latter stages of your story there, on the video production side, obviously something that during the course of the pandemic became, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I would say that probably became more of a focus, right?
Absolutely. Definitely videography and streaming obviously were the two main focuses of everything at that point, because we couldn't see anybody in person. So
right. Well, and with all the pre-recorded segments, obviously that it had a natural place. So what we wanted to do here, and I know Dane, you and I kind of spoke a little bit backstage, but we wanted to put on, I wouldn't call it necessarily a workshop, but more so talking about what goes on behind the scenes, what that production planning process is like, and then try and shed some light on what your work as a video producer, as a videographer on site, what that actually includes, because we see a lot of people in the more or less DIY space right now. And so for me personally, when I take on something that I don't necessarily know enough about, I want to know more about it just so I can manage it more effectively. So for those that may be doing it themselves, or who may be looking for a little bit of help on things, we figured this could be, a timely piece, like I said earlier. But before we get into that, I wanted to just kind of break things down into three separate buckets, if you want to call it that, 3 tiers. Okay. The first tier, I would say the lowest level of production. Again, there's a time and a place for everything. There's a right tool for every job. We have the tier 1, which would really be iPhone, laptop, recording on Zoom, virtual recordings of any kind, really. Sure. But we're talking about really like just hold up whatever device you have and capture it. Yeah. And by and large, we got a lot of those, whether it was an honoree video or it was a testimonial video. Sure. Again, you don't always have full production budget for every single piece. Of course. Then we have tier 2, which would be, single camera, more or less, a smaller crew, but a professional production. And then on the highest end, that's really sky's the limit type of stuff. We're usually in a studio. We have multiple cameras. There's camera shaders and directors and maybe some custom backdrops. And we're not really talking about the highest end, just because that's, there's so many rabbit holes that we could go down in that. I don't think it's necessarily feasible. And also, if you're in that line of work where you're putting that together, you probably already know this stuff already. So we'll leave that stuff alone. And on the tier 1 side, I mean, those tips are pretty easy, right? Like, turn your phone sideways.
Right.
we're done. You're welcome.
Exactly. You turn it horizontally so you get the most real estate for your image. Stabilize it. So if you can put it on a stand rather than hand hold it for 20 minutes, you're not going to get that seasick, shaky footage. And use either natural light or get like some kind of ring light, or a little ring light like this is inexpensive, like $30. This will give you bicolor. So either more of like an amber type of light, like like your average halogen bulb, or more of like a white, like a daylight type. So the thing is, you want to try to match that light just to get natural looking skin tones. Otherwise, you can make somebody look kind of too yellow and, kind of sickly. So you want to try to match the color. So that's all.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, in general, we'll probably focus on tier number 2, just because, again, the first and the lower end and the highest end are there's just less to talk about, right, for this purpose, and really for this audience as well. Obviously, there's not a lot of time, right? There's not a lot of time before the fall season kicks into gear, and we have a lot of groups that are trying to pivot quickly, and we're going through these conversations on a daily basis. So let's get started in the right direction, right? Where should any project like this, where should it start? What's the first thing? Okay, I've decided I need to record something. Where do I start?
Right. Well, I guess the first step would be creative vision, as far as like, what is it you're looking to create? And, being able to kind of either write out some kind of outline or run a show, so that you know what you're trying to produce, and you can translate that vision to everyone else that's involved in the project. Because if you don't have the vision itself, or if you have the vision in your head, but then everyone else involved is not on the same page, there can be a lot of miscommunications and steps missed. And that can translate to a lot of extra work. So being able to really clarify that as best as possible for yourself and for everyone else involved will certainly help save time and energy in the long run. So I would say that's the first part.
Okay. And how about location? When does that come into play?
That's part of the creative process too. I mean, it's part of that vision itself. So being able to translate what you see, whether it's going to be one location, multiple locations, the availability of that location, any other dependencies, all of those things, come into place. So I would say that comes in right around the same time. As you create your vision, then you build it out. It's like, okay, well, where is this going to happen? What time of day or night? Is weather a factor? All of those things. Is going to be outdoor shooting? Is it going to be indoor shooting? Is there going to be B-roll? To kind of support what we're talking about. Do we need cutaway footage to support that? So all of those things come into effect. Sure.
Well, it sounds like really thinking it through before you get started is, the best place to start. Shocking, right? Shocking. Yeah. But, and not for nothing, but we do see a fair amount, especially in these virtual settings where, maybe the script hasn't even been figured out yet, or we don't know what the person is going to be saying.
Right.
And yet we want to move forward with the production, and it's like, well, hold on, because
it's the cart
we're not there yet.
Right. Cart before the horse. Yeah,
exactly.
You really want to have your vision figured out. I mean, it doesn't have to be crystal clear, but you can certainly have a discussion there to suss some of those things out. But certainly you want to have a script underway, because by writing the script and what's going to be said, that can allude to, okay, what footage do you need to support it? If you're going to have B-roll, okay, where is this going to be located? Well, if you're talking about, medical, or something related to, say the coronavirus right now, it would be illustrious to have the footage maybe in a doctor's office or in a hospital, right? So the footage, the location is supporting what you're talking about. It makes contextual sense. But those things are figured out as you write the script.
Right. Well, and even situational factors in terms of sequencing, right? If we're thinking of it as a part of the whole, it's like, all right, thanks, Bob. That one little thing, right? That now demands that sequence comes after Bob's piece. Right. And absolutely. If that thing hasn't, if that one little thing isn't figured out, then you could end up with a costly reshoot.
Yes.
or really just ending up with a bad edit because we
Right.
had no other choice. So,
Absolutely.
so the first step is deciding what you want to do, figuring out
Mhm.
that content, that creative vision,
Yes.
and nailing down all your logistics ahead of time. So,
Mhm.
for you on the videography side, what does your preparation look like before you show up to a shoot?
Um, well, obviously, it's a lot of gear preparation itself, but also wanting to have those scripts available for myself, so I know order or any type of sequencing of shooting, like you said. Um, Being able to plan out if there's going to be any changing factors that I don't have control over, how I can address those things. So, for instance, if I'm shooting outdoors, am I prepared to shoot outdoors? Do I have light modification tools available to me to help with that situation? Um, do I have windscreens and wind muffs, to mitigate wind noise if I'm outside and I don't really have any control over that? Do I have access to power? All of those things come into play. With regard to the script itself, even if I'm indoors, but I'm dealing with natural light, for instance, how long is the shoot going to take? Is the lighting going to change over the course of the day? If we're going to shoot 6 to 8 segments in a day, it may start in the morning, and by the evening, it might, it might be dark or something. It could be raining. All of those things play into continuity. So is it going to look the same throughout the shoot? If a show length is maybe only a half hour or 45 minutes, an hour, are you going to have this massive change, in the scene that's going to distract people? So those are things I want to try to mitigate as much as possible by having this prior knowledge and being able to prep for it as best I can. Okay.
Man, I'm blowing it right now. We talk about the lighting changing over the course of the day,
Sure.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That obviously is something that we have no control over, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the sun,
Yep.
out of my control.
Right.
Do you find it's challenging at times to like when you say, "Here's what I need"? Do clients ever push back and say like, "Well, you can't have this," and you're like, "Well, here's why," and how much does that communication ahead of time play into this?
I feel it's absolutely crucial to at least come to some kind of common ground, because they may not fully understand the need or why it's important. But then when they see the end result, if this thing is not addressed, then it can become a point of contention, or like, oh, why is this sound this way or look this way? And that's the whole point, is that we're trying to mitigate some of those things. So I've worked in large atriums where we do a shoot, and I've had to ask for sheets, like just tablecloths, because they don't realize that, it's a concrete floor or a tile floor surrounded by glass. So it's cavernous sounding, and it looks beautiful because there's lots of light, but the sound preparation doesn't really support what we're trying to do. So any way we can kind of soak up some of that reflections, otherwise it's going to sound, very cavernous and echoey, and they're not going to like that in the finished product. So it's not just it's not just the consideration of just how things look, but it's also how things sound while we're shooting to get the best possible look.
Right. Well, and not for nothing, but make a direct comparison. In tier 1, we're not thinking about any of those things. Right. In tier 1, you're showing up with a phone, and you're saying, here you go. And sure, like I could have someone hold that phone, but there's a level of detail and production and planning to get a high quality professional product that needs to be there at that level. So, I just thought that was kind of a nice, a nice point to illustrate, because tablecloths on the ground, there's real thought that went into that.
Right.
But you started, we talked about lighting a couple of times here. And this is honestly, even from my own knowledge, because, you're just someone who knows a lot more than I do as far as this is concerned. It almost seems like this lighting for you is, would you say that this is the most important thing to consider?
Absolutely. All photography and videography is light, or the study or capture thereof, right? So for instance, right now, you don't see anything in my frame right now, but arguably it looks pretty good. And what you're not seeing is maybe about 2 to 3 feet from me is a 36-inch softbox with a grid on it. And what that does is it creates a large, soft light source that wraps around my face. So it diffuses most shadows. It fills in, you know, anything that I wouldn't want people to see. And it's very flattering. They call it kind of beauty lighting. And what the grid does is the grid keeps it very directional, so it doesn't spill all over the room. So my background looks a little darker and I kind of pop or stand out. So, you know, that's like one of the things here. Just you don't see it, but it makes an immense difference in how my image comes across and being able to control them.
How different is that than, you know, because we look at the Instagram influencers with the ring light, and I can't even just say that because I have a ring light right here, right now. And just as a little demonstration, wait for it.
Yeah.
How great does that look?
It's a little
right
hot.
Here. Yeah, right here.
You're a little hot spot.
Entirely white. I don't think this is going to work for me. So yeah, side by side comparison. This is the DIY, better than nothing, and then we have a, you know, softbox, and that's, I'm going to break this down for our non-production people. That's like the umbrella light, right? It looks like the, you know, an umbrella turned inside out with the light in the middle, more or less.
It's just a big umbrella.
High-level terminology here.
Right. You know, but that's the thing is like we're trying to give the best possible image, you know, with as little effort as possible. And, you know, there's nothing against using iPhones or like, you know, whatever you have available to yourself. You can always improve that image quality. But there are certain key concepts that go into crafting an image that really stands out. And when you put those things together, you consistently get a really great result. And that makes you stand out, you know, more than the average person. And people take note of that. They take note of the craft that goes into that, the time, the effort. And there's a level of professionalism, I think, that's translated there that, you know, is really important.
No, absolutely. You know, it for me, it's always that, like, you know, coming from a less refined, you know, visual literacy to, you know, getting a little more sophisticated with it. You're like, it just looks better, right? I mean, like, you can look at our cameras right now. Yours just looks better, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. You come away with something that's more polished. So I know you wanted to do a 3-point lighting demonstration. Is that still the case?
Sure, absolutely. I can just show you how easily something like this is crafted, because in a 3-point lighting situation, you have 3 different lights. Essentially, you have 3-point, 5-point, and you can go from there. But essentially, you have what's called your key light. Your key light is your main source, right? So that's illuminating your talent, typically. So if I turn off my key light here, you see suddenly I'm now in shadow. I'm getting reflections from my, you know, computer screen. I also have back there that I would call a practical light. It's just a lamp, but what that does for me is that motivates or gives you the feeling that this light is actually coming from that little lamp. It's kind of like a little illusion because it's on the same side, it's the same color temperature, so your brain can kind of tie it together and say, oh, okay, that makes sense. That lamp is casting enough light to light him, even though that's not possible. But what it really does is it just gives me a little bit of like context for this light. And then I have control over it, so I can kind of turn that down or turn it on off. I have it on a dimmer here, so I can adjust the intensity so it doesn't blow out or overexpose, and it's not underexposed. I can dial it in exactly where I want it for my feel.
And what would you call that light, Dane? I'm sorry.
That I call a practical light. Practical because it's one that you would find in your environment, just a normal lamp. So it's kind of like theatrical. You can put it there and make it seem like it's casting the light that this is, but it's really not. I have a background light on as well. And the same thing, it's just separating me from the background. And then basically I have that on a dimmer. And then I have a small hair light. And the hair light is basically just giving me a little blue rim off the back. And you can see it kind of kicking off there on the that little light in the back, the reflector. So those 3 lights basically make up what's kind of happening, you know, in what you're seeing. You're seeing a key light, you're seeing a background light, and a lot of times you would see something like a fill light or a kicker. that would be on this opposite side. Wherever you see shadow, I could have either another light filling in on this side. In this particular case, I kind of like the way I look in the exposure, so I don't use a kicker for that. I'm just using a little bit of hair light to kind of separate me a little further from the background. And it's also a different color temperature than my key light, and they're opposite in the color spectrum, so they complement each other really well.
So there's a lot there.
Yes, quite a bit.
Well,
Yeah.
it's funny because, coming from traditional AV, we're typically starting with key light, or a stage wash is more or
Yes.
less your key light.
Yes.
And then as the scale goes up, sometimes we'll add in some backlight with our, like the studio panels that are up at the back of the stage coming down. But
Yeah.
when we're getting into capture, obviously, it's just there's so much more sophistication to how we're going to light our subject. Now, when you scale that, right, if you have a bigger subject, if you have more people, what is it? Is it more lights? Are they bigger lights?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing is it all depends on what you're going for. So if it's multiple people, you would want a larger light source. But in order to light people softly, it has to be a larger diffuse light source, right? So that it wraps around. If it's a small, bright light source, what happens is then you get like a pin spot effect. So you get much harsher, pronounced shadows. So, it all depends on the, there you go. So the further away the light is from you, the harsher the shadows are going to be. And the closer the light source is to you, the softer and more diffused the light is going to wrap around you and give you a nice, even look. So it depends on what you're going for. And, in cinematic lighting, they use a lot of harsh shadows for more drama. But in corporate, typically we want to light people in a more flattering light, right? So I would more align this with documentary style lighting, interview style lighting. That you want people to be cast in the best possible light and make them look attractive.
Oh, absolutely. And so how do you deal, or do you deal with clients who say, lighting, do I really need that? I mean, clearly the answer is it makes, a significant difference. But have you ever had a situation where they say, look, I don't need the background light, I don't need the hair light, I just need a little light on the front?
I mean, obviously the client is always right. So ultimately, if you can't convince them, you do what they ask. But certainly being able to illustrate, the difference between a well-lit, scene that's properly thought through and just throwing a light in front of somebody is a big difference. So if ever I can illustrate that point to them so that they appreciate the difference, it does take time. It takes time. It takes thought. It takes, setup and adjustment. But I think the results are certainly worth that, and they have to really consider like, okay, what do they want their end product to look like?
Right.
If they're really asking for money, or like trying to raise funds or whatnot, I would think that, you want to present yourself in the best possible light, and you don't want to cut corners there where it comes to like, okay, this is my ask, but I look like I put the least amount of effort into it. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it kind of sounds like you'd sum it up with a little show me, don't tell me, because a lot of the time, if you like, I'll refer to this video, honestly, I'm just going to tag them in this. I'll say, hey, check that out. That's why you need the lighting.
Yeah.
So that's super helpful. Well, thank you, Dane. And, we talked about some lighting equipment. I do want to kind of go down the hole of equipment for a second. Tell me about cameras, because again, when I'm thinking in my head, like, what's the most important thing to show up to a shoot? Cameras at the top of the list for me. Obviously, lighting makes a huge difference, but what about cameras? What are your thoughts there?
Cameras, near equally important. The thing is, if you have a camera that has an interchangeable lens system, what that means is a camera that you can switch out lenses and customize the lens for the application. It gives you a lot more flexibility. So I personally shoot with like a mirrorless camera, and mirrorless cameras now are basically modified photography cameras. So they are photography cameras that have video capabilities, but because they don't have the mirror in the body anymore, it actually makes them much more compact, and it gives you the ability to adapt different brands of lenses from different manufacturers onto the same camera body. So I can use a Sony camera with an adapter with Canon lenses, which historically before mirrorless cameras, that was impossible. Everything was proprietary. So it gives a lot of flexibility for what type of lens or glass that you work with. And here, for instance, I'm shooting with the Sigma, made specifically for Sony, but I have some that are made for other cameras. And the thing here is the way I separate myself from the background. You can see that I'm very much in focus and I'm very sharp, and the background is very blurred and soft. That's called the application of depth of field. So when I have a very fast lens, meaning that the aperture opens very wide, it gives you a very shallow depth of field or a very shallow plane of focus. So if I'm within that plane of focus, then I'm perfectly sharp and detailed, but my microphone is out of that plane of focus, so it's softer, and then anything in the distance becomes more and more out of focus. So there's less and less detail there. And
so you're saying that's not like a zoom background, right?
No, not a zoom background. You know, this way you won't see me disappear if I move one way or another. That's the nice thing is, you know, knowing these applications and how these things work, you can create a consistent result. So it's not like a zoom background where, you know, you turn your head and like suddenly part of the background disappears because it's green screen, but it's done poorly. So this gives you a lot more control.
Absolutely. So, and this goes back to the planning, is these are things that are factoring into, you know, your preparation. It's what lens am I going to bring? How am I going to shoot this?
Right.
It also illustrates the point why when things change, locations change, that changes what we do on the planning side. Sure. And why sometimes, you know, it's hard to have complete flexibility when, you know, we're actually doing a lot of thought and a lot of preparation work. And, you know, and it's geared for very specific circumstances and a very specific environment. So, you know, I think that kind of illustrates that point well. But, you know, beyond camera, beyond lighting gear, you know, you probably bring your bag of goodies, right? What other kinds of things do you show up to a shoot with?
I always try to have some kind of lighting modification, like whatever I can use to control. So I have bounces or diffusers. I don't have one in arm's length right now, but basically just a foldable diffuser that allows me to bounce light back at someone or diffuse the sun. Say that, you know, it's really intense and I needed to kind of soften it a bit. I can use something like that. I can put it like underneath, so it's just out of frame, and it would kick light back up, filling in shadows. So it's a very flexible tool to have, and you know, one that I try to always have on shoots. It's also great for white balancing. One of the things is cameras interpret whatever information they're exposed to based on what we tell them the settings are. So a camera doesn't know what white is. So if we say that, you know, a light is more yellow and then we expose it to something's more blue, it's actually going to go the opposite. So being able to properly white balance in the beginning ensures that you have natural looking skin tones. So that's something that you know, having like a bounce or something that has a white, pure white, you know, surface, I can calibrate to that in the beginning before I start recording.
There you go. I'm smarter than a camera. I know what white is.
Yep.
Perfect.
The thing is, our eyes actually see all spectrums, right? Or you know, not ultraviolet, but our brain like filters out some of those light spectrums so that we naturally see things the way we're used to. Whereas a camera just picks it all up and you're seeing the unfiltered result. So fluorescent lights, for instance, have a lot of green in them, you know, and that's why sometimes if you don't calibrate those properly, you're going to look kind of sickly under fluorescent light.
So this actually reminds me of something that I'm so glad Joe is not here for. Do you remember it was making its way around the internet circles where it was like, is this dress blue and black or white and gold?
Yes.
So is that kind of along the lines of what we're talking about?
I think so. I mean, I think that's more how certain people, I guess, interpret information. I don't know if that has to do necessarily with color blindness or something on a spectrum, but in essence, yes, it's really like how the camera is interpreting it based on what you're telling it's seeing, right? So
people don't have the same white balance. Is that what you're saying?
I guess so. I guess not all people have all the same white balance.
Hold on, wait for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's on a banner. There we go. Your main takeaway: people don't all have the same white balance.
That's right.
How about Dane? How about teleprompters? What do we think about teleprompters?
Teleprompters can be a blessing or a curse. I consider them more of a blessing. I mean, I'm using one right now. I am not using it for content's sake. What I am using it for specifically here is you and I are on a broadcast. So if I'm, say, doing something like this, or a lot of times I'm doing a Zoom call and I want to speak to my audience directly, I'm looking right at the camera, and the camera lens is behind the glass of the teleprompter. So this way I'm addressing my audience head on, like straightforward. So it makes for a more connected feeling when you're addressing anyone. If you're looking directly at them, you're making eye contact. If you're looking down and you're reading, or you're looking at a computer screen or off to the side, people can feel like you're distracted, even though you're not. Maybe you're just reading something and following notes, but this certainly makes a difference. So in here, I'm logged into just a small iPad right underneath, and I basically have my teleprompter reflecting you back at me, so I can just make eye contact and I can look at you during the broadcast. In the case where we're recording, talent, and they have material and there's a lot that they have to remember, having a teleprompter there to scroll at the speed that they're comfortable, giving them a peace of mind that they don't have to memorize as much as possible, that this way it's right in front of them. We can adjust the speed according to what they're comfortable with and have them still look at the camera and give the best delivery possible, helps to really connect the audience with what you're saying. So I found that to be very helpful. The cons to that obviously is that it does take a little bit of practice to get comfortable on a teleprompter, just like anything else. And right. It really is a skill, because you have to dial in the speed that people are comfortable working with. And that just takes, a few attempts to kind of get there where people feel natural at it. But I would say the pros definitely outweigh the cons when it comes to teleprompting.
Yeah, well, and so it's funny actually. Back in when I was in college, I did a lot of TV broadcast. I studied TV broadcast in school, and I'll never forget. We had to take turns running the teleprompter for a couple of class projects that we ended up doing. Sure. It really is a skill, I gotta say. Being able to, and there's a lot of trust, as the subject, in front of the camera and the teleprompter operator. Like you have to be able to be on point, otherwise they're just like a sitting duck. It's just it hasn't gotten there yet. Sorry, I guess I just have to wait for the next words to come up. But no, that's certainly. So now when it is very anxiety provoking. Now, when you shoot, are you also the teleprompter operator?
Absolutely not. not in the case of the shoots that I'm doing, where I'm operating the camera and also a lot of times monitoring the audio. It's a bit too much. There's too much focused attention required for the teleprompter operation that I'd be able to do that as well. Now, with my home system, I mean, there are apps where I can throw it on the iPad and it actually picks up the microphone and tries to keep up with me.
Right.
Does it work great? It's okay. It's not the same as having someone operate it for you, but it helps, and it's effective if you're within 2 to 3 feet. Now, the thing is, during the pandemic, obviously 6 feet social distancing, that's completely ineffective. So if you're trying to apply something like that, where there's some kind of AI component to it, it doesn't work because you're so far away from the microphone. So so for me, I like to have a dedicated teleprompter operator. I can typically handle operating a camera and audio. I know what to look and listen for enough that I can handle both of those, but teleprompter is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, and it gets back to the whole, when a client comes and asks you, oh, do I need this? Do I really need 2 people? Well, if you have a teleprompter, the answer is yeah. You're already doing too much for one person, and also following somebody's speech pattern is too much. So that's certainly a good point. We're coming down. We only have a few more minutes left, so I want to take it to the end of the process of coming away with a finished product, right? Okay. And that would be post-production.
Mhm.
Obviously, you've done a lot of that, and things go more or less hand in hand
Yes.
in terms of videography. So,
Mhm.
one of the questions that keeps coming up is, well, how much time does that take? You shoot the footage, and
Uh-huh.
can you send it to me later on? Can you send it to me that day?
No. It's a simple answer. The big thing about post-production is a lot of it is dependent upon pre-production. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that if you put in a lot of pre-production and planning ahead of time, it helps to organize the post-production process. Organization is one of the biggest or most paramount key things to having a project go smoothly. So knowing what shots you have, having a shot list or run of show, and knowing what's covered, having all your scripts and any changes that were shot, during the day of, being able to sync the audio and the video. If you do two system audio, you don't use camera audio typically, because the thing is, the camera is further away from a person. You can zoom in and make it look like they're right there and filling the frame, but a lot of times the camera's 6-8 feet away from a person. You use that onboard microphone, all you're getting is echoey reflections. It's not going to sound very distinct. So then you have to take that microphone that they were wearing, the lav mic or the boom mic that was overhead from them, and synchronize that after the fact. If you have different edit points, that you're going to cut to, add in B-roll. If you have other camera angles, then you have to synchronize these things. So there's no simple answer, because obviously it depends on the level of production going on. If you have one camera, multiple cameras, if you have B-roll, if you have slides or any other images that have to be inserted, all these things have to be kind of laid out on the timeline, and you want to get your audio and your video synchronized first. You want to go through your cuts and make sure that you have the main takes that you want on your timeline. Then typically I work a little bit differently, but I try to sweeten my audio first as best as possible. For me, I think that just automatically makes the picture look better when the audio is really good. And also, I don't have to, make a bunch of edits and then go back and try to find the audio. If, God forbid, like something goes out of sync, that can be a really big problem, to try to go back and find the audio when it went out and then synchronize everything, after it's been cut up. So, I don't know if that helps answer your question, but I don't know if there's a simple answer for production itself. I think it varies per project and what's really involved.
Right. Well, and that kind of gets back to the beginning, right? It really connects back with where your, creative vision is, and all those logistics and all the planning that follows.
Right.
It's something that's come up time and time, just because it is that, we'll call it counterintuitive thing, where there could be a lot of work that has to happen after we capture it, even if what we captured was pretty straightforward, in order to come away with a professional product.
At this point, I think there are probably at least 2 or 3 feature films that have been shot on iPhones. So that goes to say, like, you could say, like, oh, shooting something on an iPhone can be simple, or it could be an actual, like,
incredibly complex
length. Right.
Yeah.
So,
that's actually a good point. So PSA, I'm not talking down on people who shoot high quality stuff on iPhones. We constantly tell people the best camera you have access to is in your pocket right now.
Right.
And in general, but it's more so the level of production that you put into it. And so I'll equate that with being a cell phone video, but obviously not the be all end all. So thank you for pointing that out. All right. Well, we're just about out of time. Dane, do you have a checklist? What kinds of things can I make sure I know about or I have in mind before I begin any project?
Wow, that's a very broad question. Before beginning a project, I mean, trying to clarify that vision for everyone as best as possible, coming up with some basic scripting to work off of. And obviously, if you have a run of show for the overall vision of the project, that's great. As far as like a checklist, when I go into more of like the actual shot itself, I think about, are there any distracting elements in my frame? I had an instance where one of my associates I was working with happened to be standing just out of my eye line, but I didn't realize that he was actually being reflected in a mirror that was in frame, and I didn't catch it because it, the monitor was too small. So, like trying to scope out anything that's distracting or shouldn't be in the frame is important. If you're setting up the shot yourself, obviously making sure that you don't have a lot of extra headroom. That's a common thing I see a lot of people do, is that they make themselves too small in the frame, that they'll be, normal height, but then they have like all this extra space that's unnecessary. What to wear, if you want to wear solid colors, that's okay. If you're shooting for a green screen, don't wear green, obviously. So be aware of like what your background is, if you're going to blend in or you're going to separate from the background the day of the shoot. There's something called moire that happens. So moire is an effect that appears on camera when someone has a very distinct pattern on their shirt or blouse. So if you have like very small pinstripes or checks, they can show up as a very distinct like pattern that shows up on camera. So you want to try to avoid that if at all possible. Having, I don't want to say makeup, but even like little blotting, like wipes or something like that. People do get hot on camera. They get nervous. So, as we're shooting in HD more and more, there's more and more detail. So you want to be able to obviously give people a way to kind of touch up in between takes. So this way it doesn't show up on camera. Is that enough?
Yeah, I mean, look, I just wanted to pick your brain on that, but that's
Sure.
certainly, it's certainly in line with our conversation thus far. And,
Yeah.
I think it's helpful, especially, again, a lot of people are heading out in this direction for the first time. Sure. And don't really know what to do about it, where to start. So hopefully this kind of clarifies, that fuzzy line between I can do this myself and how do I get something that just looks better.
Right.
So Dane, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here, and for everyone watching and who will watch in the future, Dane is such a great guy, and I gotta say we've over the last year and a half, there has been a lot of work and a lot of being in the trenches together, and
absolutely,
so we've always appreciated having you and appreciate your work and your creative vision as well. So
thank you, Ron. I appreciate
thank you very much. And I guess we'll just kind of close this show out together because again,
sure.
You're one of us. So one thing I want to do
this week.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. I can tell you his lines because he's got the same ones over and over again. The one thing, are you busy? I don't know if you have anything going on, anything penciled into your calendar, September 1st and 2nd. Does anything ring a bell?
I believe that is the Pirate U, is it not?
Boom!
Oh.
There we go. Thank you for hitting your mark, Dane. It's almost like we rehearsed this.
Yeah.
Yes, Pirate University. We're going to be going over topics like this. As many things as we can fit into 2 days, AV, virtual, hybrid, all of the above. I will be teaching a class, myself and Nick. So if you want to hear more of me blabber, come on down. But if you want more information, check out our Facebook. That is really where, I'd say most of the information lives right now. It'll get you the link over to the event platform. So check out the Facebook, register for the event. Come and help us support the cause. Make-A-Wish Foundation is the benefactor of all of the ticket sales that we raise. So really excited for that. And otherwise, come check it out next week, Wednesday, 1 o'clock every week. We're gonna keep this going, even if it's your 30th birthday. Even if you wanted to take the day off, it doesn't matter. We're still doing the show.
And dedication.
That's dedication. We're still gonna have some great guests like Dane, come on to the program. And so yes, thank you. Be like Alexa. Sign up for Pirate University. You don't want to miss it. Yeah, I think that's all we got from Dane. So thank you again. And
my pleasure.
Until the next one, right?
Yeah.
All right. Take care.